This is a slapstick comedy made in 1900 by pioneering filmmakers Mitchell and Kenyon. Their films were lost for nearly a century, but they've recently been found, over 800 of them. This is a funny movie, Edwardian style, with a corrupt policeman and a cheeky kid who saves the day. They made most of their money from showing their films locally to small audiences in the north of England. But with their non-fiction films, Mitchell and Kenyon chronicled changing attitudes to crime and morality. Mitchell and Kenyon hit the jackpot with their curiously titled Diving Lucy, a film that became an international sensation. It told the timeless tale of humiliating the local bobby. Starring a few friends and shot locally, Diving Lucy was advertised in America as the biggest English comedy hit of the year. And the glamorous location for the filming? The pond in Blackburn's Queen's Park. Mitchell and Kenyon's crude one-reel comic films were a precursor to the comedies of both Chaplin and the Keystone Cops, made 10 years later. But Hollywood didn't exist yet. The majority of films at this time were being made in France and England. Imported European dramas and comedies were popular in the States, as well as homegrown ones. Diving Lucy worked within a well-established tradition of poking fun at the police and authority figures in general. Mitchell and Kenyon had made a British box office hit in the States, an Edwardian equivalent to Notting Hill or the Full Monty, and all from a park in Blackburn, Lancashire. Their big hit made them big money. Their partnership began in 1897. By 1904, under the brand name of Northern, they were making hundreds of one-reel films a year. But it was their non-fiction films that were the most popular with the British audiences. In the early 1900s, moving film was a brand new invention, and there was no such things as cinemas. It wasn't their aim to make an historic record of Edwardian life. They made them to entertain and make a profit, just like the film business now. They would film anything they thought people would pay to see. But by filming at factory gates, as in this film, they would be guaranteed big audiences. The people they filmed would be curious enough to pay to see themselves on screen. They were shown in tents at fairgrounds and in music halls all over the Northwest. And these local films were the most popular item on the bill. But these amazing films only came to light in 1994 by accident. Builders were refitting a shop when they discovered 3 metal churns in a cold basement full of old film. They were nearly thrown away, but fortunately they handed them over to local film historian Peter Worden instead. He realised immediately that this was a forgotten treasure of Mitchell and Kenyon films. He stored them carefully before donating the find to the nation. The British Film Institute took charge of the historic collection and painstakingly restored it. It took 3 years, but now the results are amazing. 100-year-old films with hardly a scratch. Many as clear as the day they were shot. The films of Mitchell and Kenyon show us Edwardian society at a time of transition. The forces of law and order were modernising and becoming more organised. By the time these films of the Manchester Police's passing out parade were shot, on Thursday the 23rd of May 1901 in Birchfields Park, the force was becoming more professional. Chief Constable Robert Peacock, seen here in all his finery, Admiral's hat and white sash, was instrumental in changing the force. Under him they became more professional and modern, and unlike previous chief constables, Peacock had risen through the ranks. One of his training initiatives was first aid. He introduced police handbooks and a career structure with exams, where if you passed, you were rewarded with promotion. There was a certain amount of standing on ceremony that went with this newfound respectability. The pride in the uniforms and matching moustaches, all of them seemed to have moustaches. The Birchfield Park film features some 300 policemen at their annual parade. Now, Edwardians loved a bit of pomp and circumstance and, of course, a police band. Well, Ada Bickley saw our article in the Manchester Evening News about this film and got in touch.
Oh, look at that. And all more or less the same size. That's what looks so good. Very good. My husband's grandfather was William Bickley, who of course has been dead a very long time, and I never met him, obviously. He was 25 when he joined the police force in Manchester, and that was in 1891. We were told in the family that he had gone into the police band. Now there's the band. I think that's him, the one without a moustache, because he does definitely look like my husband. Yes, I feel sure it was. William was born in 1866. And he was a young boy, was a labourer. At 15 he joined the army and travelled about. I think it was while he was in Ireland that he met his wife. And his wife was rather fed up with him always being away. And they had 4 children, and he came to Manchester, probably thinking that he would get a position in the police force because of his military training. But William was never a sergeant, he was only ever a constable. The fact that he'd been in the army for 10 years before joining the police force made him feel that he was happy to be a member of the rank and file rather than having the authority to order other people about. And in 1906 he left, having served 14.5 years.
Although the police were changing, the public's perception of them hadn't caught up. Richard and Kenyon's comedy film still depicted the police as the same clueless characters that had existed since the force started in the early 19th century. The PC plods and wooden tops that appear in the Sherlock Holmes stories were favourite acts in the music halls, as well as in the early films. The constables were recruited almost solely from the working class, and they were resented by the communities they lived in, as they were seen as being able to use the law against their own kind. Class contempt came from both sides. The middle classes thought individual policemen were stupid, but they came to accept that the police were doing a good job, providing it wasn't them who felt the long arm of the law. This disdain probably didn't matter much to the police, as they had guaranteed pensions, and even then were relatively well paid. So they didn't have much need for a union. One area where unions were very necessary were the docks. The dockers' strike of 1889 had led to a huge growth in trade union membership across the whole country. This film is of the Alexander Dock in Liverpool in April 1901. Liverpool was the largest port besides London, and it was a gateway to the empire. Goods were shipped here and traded from all over the world. But Liverpool wasn't only exporting goods. Young and old people alike were leaving England in search of a better life. Between 1900 and 1914, more than 5% of the population left Britain permanently. From these docks, from Glasgow, from Bristol, hundreds of thousands of people left for the New World, particularly North America, before the First World War. The Irish left for America, the Scottish for Canada, while the English and Welsh went to empire countries like Australia, New Zealand and South Africa. Mainly unskilled and poor, they left to give themselves a fresh start and escape Britain's suffocating class system. At £6 for a single ticket, the third-class fare would have been expensive for these Lancashire mill girls in their boaters and shawls, seen here boarding the Saxonia, bound for Boston. The thought of a new life was exciting, but the grueling journey took 10 days, and even then, many of them returned, having failed to make their fortunes as domestic servants in America. These films of people waving farewell to friends and family aboard the Saxonia and the Lucania weren't recorded for posterity's sake. Richard and Kenyon developed them the same day, so their relatives could see them that night. Huge numbers of people are on the move, some leaving, some staying permanently, others just passing through. In 1902, nearly twice as many people travelled through Britain on their way to the New World as those who actually settled here. Railway and shipping companies made lots of money transporting foreign migrants across the country to ports like Liverpool. They could have stayed if they'd got off, but they weren't encouraged to. As one German immigrant put it, England opened its doors to all comers, but extended a warm embrace to no one. The arrival of immigrant communities, who were separated both by language and religious custom, caused the types of fears we are very familiar with today. Britain was getting very worked up about immigration from Eastern Europe. In response to public pressure, to scaremongering stories in the press, the government passed the first ever legislation to curb immigration. It was the Aliens Act of 1905. Before 1905, Britain had no immigration laws and proudly maintained an open doors policy. Political dissidents, intellectuals, and businessmen alike were all welcome. Eastern Europeans, like these men in their Astrakhan hats, along with Germans, Chinese, Indians and Italians, settled in cities all over the United Kingdom, from London to Cardiff, Glasgow to Manchester. Irish and Italian immigrants were viewed with suspicion by some. As Roman Catholics, they were seen as subversive and anti-British. Religious festivals like Whit and Easter were still major public celebrations in Britain. This film of the Manchester Catholic community was shot on Whit Friday, the 27th of May, 1904.
That is Piccadilly. That's walking back from Albert Square. Piccadilly.
We found Serafino de Felice through an Italian Heritage Association in Manchester. His grandfather came to England in the 1870s.
There he's got the bandiere tricolore on. You see it? That's what we wear when we walk. We still wear with the green, white and red. I've got one exactly. It's green, white and red. So he's Italian with that sash on, which means those are the Italian unmarried girls with the lilies. That's fantastic. The shape of the Well Madonna here is different to anything in my memory of seeing pictures of, and that is a joy. In 1890, the Madonna of the Day, which was an outside decoration, it just had flowers on the base, carried by 6 stalwart men, his grandfather was one of them, was the first time the statue of Our Lady, or any statue of religious significance to the Catholic faith, had walked through the streets of England, never mind Manchester. That's St. Joseph, you see there? That's the father of Jesus. And now those children there will be the communion girls. Oh, look at that. I don't get at that. Communion boys again. You see with the medal here on the lapels, stamped out medal denoting First Communion. Because when you were 7 years of age, you made your communion. Now, those lads there, that is the communion class now. You know, that'll shake the bishop up today to see so many boys from one parish.
The Whit processions were high-profile events and took an enormous amount of organisation. The marshals ensured the safety of the 18,000 participants. The procession took over 2 hours. They were an important opportunity to affirm the community's respectability. Parents would save up all year to pay for their children's first communion clothes, only to pawn them as soon as the march was over. But if the outfit they'd managed to scrimp for was deemed unfit, they would be banned from marching for fear of letting the side down. The religious divide between the Catholic and Protestant communities was felt keenly. They walked on separate days, the Protestants on the Monday and the Catholics on the Friday. Catholics and Protestants were also split along cultural and social lines, from the school you went to, the place you lived, and sometimes even the place you worked.
The division was always there. The Catholic schools never played football against the Church of England schools. They were a separate breed on this face of this earth. And you went for a job and you'd turn around and say, my name's McCarthy or something like that. It says, can I have a job? And if the fellow at the other side was a Catholic, they'd take you on. If you weren't, he'd say, not today. And you'd go away.
These parades and marches through towns and cities are part of a long tradition in this country, stretching back to the Middle Ages. Richard and Kenyon filmed them irrespective of who was marching. From charity events raising money for lifeboats and local hospitals to a number of different religious groups. Catholics in Blackburn, Wesleyan Methodists in Clitheroe, and in Manchester the Spiritualist Church, who demonstrated their Christian belief in life after death. Many religious celebrations were originally pagan feast days. They were an opportunity for the townspeople to get together, dress up, take a day off, and enjoy a drink or two. After all, they had a ready excuse. In some cities, the beer was safer to drink than the water. And for men, it was advertised as a way to keep your strengths up. Some manual workers were drinking 24 pints per shift, and they could buy it right outside work, as you can see in this film of an engineering works in Oldham. In 1900, there were over 125,000 places licensed to sell alcohol in the United Kingdom. Pubs remained open most of the time. They only had to shut between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m, and even that wasn't strictly enforced. When they were open, children were welcome to drink beer alongside their parents. In the early 20th century, a pub could stay open pretty well as long as the landlord wanted, which meant it was quite possible and not uncommon to pop in for a drink on the way to work. It wasn't until the First World War that the government decided to curb and control the drinking habits of the workforce, particularly those involved with munitions and in engineering. And then our current licensing laws were introduced. In Edwardian Britain, attempts were being made to change society. Some of these were from the top down, by patronising philanthropists. Others were more grassroots organisations. The temperance movement campaigned against the drinking of alcohol. Original working-class self-help group, teetotalers promoted taking the pledge to stop drinking for life. This film, called Burnley Children's Treat, shows local middle-class dignitaries corralling children of the parish to march through town on the way to a healthy day out in the local countryside. The children wave cups and mugs at the camera, and the special treat being offered to them, coffee and buns, an attempt to turn the children away from a life of alcoholic ruin. The teetotalers had a children's league called the Band of Hope. Kids were encouraged to take the pledge from the age of 6. At the beginning of the century, there are over 10,000 bands of hope in the United Kingdom, and in total, 600,000 men, women and children had sworn to abstain from alcohol. This film of the East Manchester Band of Hope was shot in June 1901. It shows the community of Ardwick on the way to a temperance fete in the local park. The children carry barrels with slogans, like this one saying, "To let." To find out more about this largely forgotten movement, we went to the British Library's newspaper collection to find some reports of the time. Now, I found an account of the march in the Alliance News of June the 27th, 1901. The Alliance News was a temperance publication. It says, East Manchester Band of Hope Union. The annual procession was held on Saturday, 19 societies taking part. There's now an account of the route, and it says here, the Ardwick Industrial School Band of Hope Boys called for special attention all along the route, and they were cheered by the thousands of spectators who were eager to see the procession. The total number of children and adults present was 3,250. The loudest cheers would have gone to the boys of the industrial school, of course, because for the Band of Hope, they had started as sinners and were on their way to becoming saints. Industrial schools were a particularly Victorian invention, for children who were thought to be disruptive were from single-parent families or were homeless. Officially, they were for improving the children, but in reality, they were a combination of children's home and young offenders institution. We've got a copy of the 1901 census for the Ardwick Industrial School. This tells us who was in residence at the time of the census, the masters and what they call scholars, the boys. This census has a lot of kind of rather interesting information. For example, we see the age of the boys. Mostly they're between about 9 and 12, 13, 14. Also, it tells us where they came from. And a lot of the boys come from Manchester, as one would expect, but also many from all over Britain, actually. I noticed one here from Ireland. A lot of boys I noticed from London, East London, from Bethnal Green. Here, George Jelves, scholar, Bethnal Green.
Well, I can't believe it, really, you know. I think my old man was here. He must have been about 13, mustn't he? I think they look quite smart. There he comes, look, the kid in front there, you watch, carrying the banner on the right. That's my dad, George Giles. He had a little saucy grin on him, didn't he? It looked like him, it's the expression on his face. Saucy little what's it. His mother was in service in a house, big house, you know. And It's more like a maid, but as far as I know, she was French descent. She was working all the time, and she looked after him, but she couldn't look after him a lot, could she, really? He had no father to look after him. So you had to be hard to live like that, didn't you? When you think about it, those poor kids, it was no joke, was it? To think what they had to put up with. I'm glad I wasn't there. Going from London to Manchester, it's a long way away for a kid, wasn't it? It's like going to a foreign land, wasn't it? They looked after him. Quite possible, if he was at home, his mum couldn't buy him clothes like that, could she? He was a jolly sort of a fella. I'm looking here for my dad's name, Jules Gels. Half of that page is Bethnal Green. They could have been without family, couldn't they, and all sorts. Sent away to this home. That must have been the only one, I say, that were suitable for these kids, because it was quite a large place, I think, wasn't it? I feel sorry for him, really, but then again, it didn't hurt him, I don't think, because he turned out to be quite a normal sort of a man, you know. He was good to everybody. He had a good heart. He worked hard. And look what you finished up with. When he was 46, I was 9. You can see him when we were on that boat, on the paddle steamer going down to Southend.
George Gels went on to join the Navy. He fought in the First World War, and rather than return to Bethnal Green, he settled in Essex. By 1904, Mitchell and Kenyon's camera crews had become a familiar sight to crowds all over the northwest of England. But they weren't trying to make a social record or an arty documentary about Britain at that time. They were simply businessmen making money. Sagar Mitchell, 37, former cabinet maker, photographer, and now a successful cinematographer, was an eligible man about town. He met a local woman, Annie Eliza Mercer, a widow, also of Blackburn, Lancashire. They were married in October 1904. Precisely 9 months later, their son, John Bretherton Mitchell, was born. This film has a rather mysterious start. It seems very unlike the other Mitchell and Kenyon films, very static, very close up. Doesn't seem to be showing a local event or entertainment. It's rather sinister as a chap, smartly dressed, standing outside the door of a humble late Victorian house. A woman in a shawl walks by. Poor woman, I guess. We now move to another scene. A policeman standing outside the gates to what I presume is a police station. Back of a woman's head, shawl, a hat, a hair in a bun. She's walking towards the policeman. The policeman is looking at her. The notice on the door, I can't quite read it, there's double doors. Bootle! It says Bootle on this board. He's taking her in to the police station. She must be from the house. Now, 3 figures are walking from the camera towards, again I assume the same police station, different view. There's a man being held between 2 other men. They're all smartly dressed. He's clearly under arrest. He's being escorted to the police station. Most peculiar little film. I say quite unlike the other ones. So what is this mysterious film about? An arrest, seemingly, taking place in Berry Street, Bootle. And all the film says on its first frame is, Gaudi. What can that be? Gaudi. We know that Berry Street is in Bootle, Merseyside, and we know the film must be made in 1901 or 1902, so it seems reasonable to look through local papers, Liverpool papers, for a clue as to what this Gaudi business is. This is the Liverpool Mercury for December the 2nd, 1901. I've been working my way through all this year. There are strange things indeed buried here. And here we have it. The Liverpool bank fraud. Gaudi caught at Bootle. His life in hiding. So Gaudi is a person. Gaudi, Thomas Peterson Gaudi, is a notorious criminal, a fraudster. How amazing. He seems to have robbed his own bank. Cude's plausible tale in Berry Street. It turns out that Thomas Gaudi was a white-collar criminal, and a pretty infamous one at that. Once I got the date, I was able to find a lot of information about him and his crime published in various places. Here, for example, is a lovely thing. Liverpool City Police. Fantastic reward poster. £250 reward. Thomas Peterson Gaudi. There's a picture of him. And here is an article in the Illustrated Police News. It details his arrest. Taken in bed, it seems. Now, of course, Gaudi is a pretty unusual name, which meant it was possible for me to pretty quickly find descendants, including Leila Gaudi.
I've never seen this before. My husband was Gavin Gaudi, and Thomas was my husband's uncle. Oh, that's the house where he lives. Is that his front door? My husband really, he clammed up about him. He knew that there'd been a robbery and that he'd been accused of it, and it was his uncle. And the family sort of didn't want to talk about it. Sort of understandable, I suppose. I only knew about him through the cutting in the Telegraph some years ago that said, about the bank robber, and gave something about it. And, because the name was the same, and I cut it out and showed it to my husband, but he didn't want to know anything about it.
Thomas Gaudi worked as a clerk at the Bank of Liverpool. In just 2 years, he managed to forge cheques for a total of £170,000, or £10.2 million in today's money. When his crime was discovered, he went on the run and faced a nationwide manhunt. When he was caught, the Liverpool newspapers took great delight in pointing out that the master criminal, who seemed to have disappeared off the face of the earth, was in actual fact hiding out in his lodging house, which was just over the bridge from the police station. His landlady, Mrs. Harding, had been tempted by the £250 reward. She picked up the equivalent of £15,000 today. Detectives Dixon and Wardle popped across the road and arrested Gaudi while he was still in bed. Gaudi had in fact been leading a double life. Quiet bank clerk by day and a ladies' man with a compulsive gambling habit by night. He had himself become a victim of a gambling gang. Berry Street's now rather like an industrial estate. The houses here were demolished in the 1960s, so very little survives from Gaudi's time. The bridge, that's still there. Very handsome it is too, actually. Now, Gaudi's lodging house was just over there, where that low building is, the chap coming out. That's where Gaudi lodged. Right here in front of me was this splendid hotel, the Royal Standard. Entrance here, big beer barrel hanging up there. Now the stairs to the road above survive, are reconstructed, but generally in their original form. This is where the crowds gather to watch the scene. Now, this is good. Over there is the police station. Recognise that. Dominates the scene. Gaudi was tried at the Old Bailey and got 10 years hard labour. He died at Parkhurst Prison on the Isle of Wight, aged only 34. The story, of course, led to great shame for the Gaudi family.
My husband said that the family crippled themselves financially and paid the money back. But the amount of money that's mentioned, I mean, they wouldn't have been able to pay that amount back. He must have known that what he was doing was dishonest. But he thought he would pay it back. This is the downfall of so many people, isn't it? And, you know, he came from Shetland, he'd gone to school, he was well educated, but he wasn't used to any of the sort of dirty ways of the world. And unfortunately, he got into the hands of these gamblers. I feel that he was a young man, easily tempted, and alone, that he had no one to turn to, and I felt terribly sad, really, for him.
So there we have it. The film Mark Simply Gaudi was in fact the first crime reconstruction in film history. It was truly pioneering because it used actual locations and people who were involved in the real incident. The Gaudi film showed a new approach to telling a true crime story. Along with the showman's novel techniques, the audience's tastes were changing. They were becoming more sophisticated. Increasingly bored with watching parades and factory gates, they wanted more complex entertainment. The thrill of seeing themselves on screen was fading. As one punter said, "I see enough of myself when shaving in the mirror." Audiences wanted a more structured night out, and by 1910 a new type of moving picture experience was being offered. George Green, a fairground entrepreneur, spotted a gap in the market for refined entertainment in purpose-built palaces, and he started building cinemas. Cinema owners responded to the punters' new tastes in films. They also wanted stories, not events. Taste in film was changing, and the filmmakers had to respond to the marketplace. The star system was starting in America, with celebrities like Lillian Gish and Mary Pickford. Charlie Chaplin had just arrived in Los Angeles to begin his film career. Back in 1901, Mitchell and Kenyon's local films had been the top of the bill. Now, 10 years later, they were just a filler between the dramas. The golden age that Mitchell and Kenyon's films captured was coming to an end. The European states were getting themselves ready for an inevitable conflict. In Britain, the steady march to war began with small steps. Militarised youth groups had been established all over the country. Robert Baden-Powell, seen here in one of Mitchell and Kenyon's films in Accrington, was a Boer War hero and originally wrote his famous Aids to Scouting as a military training manual. The aims of the Boy Scout movement were to develop leadership, comradeship and responsibility. It caught on quickly. By 1913, there were over 150,000 Boy Scouts in the United Kingdom. Here we see Boy Scout troops proudly marching the towns of Clitheroe, Warrington and Chorley. The movement fitted perfectly with the ethos of the times. It was patriotic and imperialistic in outlook. The Boys' Brigade had started in Glasgow in 1883 and was well established by the time this film was shot. Described by its founder as a religious movement using military methods, it involved uniforms, military training and religious education. These children in the Boys' Brigade's films were being conditioned for war. Military values and ideals went hand in hand with the steady stockpiling of weapons across Europe. Local films, which had been so popular with the audiences in the fairgrounds and music halls, felt dated. The new smart cinemas were showing proper dramas and comedies, not one-reelers made with some friends in the local park. Film companies had to cater to the new cinema owners now, and Mitchell & Kenyon couldn't compete with the bigger outfits in the south of England, let alone the American imports from Hollywood. The world was also on the brink of change. In Europe, the focus moved to conflict, and war was declared in the summer of 1914. The young men in these factory gate films who had joined military youth groups were now urged to join up. We found a descendant of one of these boys, Rex Lord.
Both my father and all his brothers, they all started working in the mills. My father worked in the cotton mill at Dunnockshaw. He started as a 11-year-old boy, and he retired when he was in 70-ish, I think. And he'd been there for 50-odd years. My uncles, John and Joseph, were both weavers in the Rosendale Valley. They'd be coming out like these people are coming out now. Probably working from, say, 7 in the morning until 5:30 at night for 5.5 days a week. No doubt they started in the mills when they were going as part-time, half a day at school, half a day in the mills. Once they went in that factory, that iron gate on the left of the picture was locked, and they couldn't get out again. That was it. They were inside all the time. There was no coming out. A lot of toil, a lot of hard work. These cotton mills, they weren't picnics, you know. They were hell on earth, some of these places. Absolutely, they must have been. The factory masters, they were tyrants. My father probably joined up. I would have managed to get away from the turmoil, the poverty, and the drudgery what they were getting in the job.
In response to the call for volunteers, men from villages all over Lancashire and Yorkshire formed battalions that became known as the Pals.
Pals, friends, grew up together, went to Sunday school together. Very closely knit people. Lots of these lads would be 16, 18, been working in the mills and mines for, no doubt, 7 or 8 years. They'd be cotton spinners, miners, weavers. Company Sergeant Major there with his walking stick. It's a status symbol of the regiment to be able to walk with a stick. They use them as a marker for counting how many paces. A pace stick, actually, that's what they use for. They've got the bayonets fixed, which typifies that they're virtually freemen of the borough. My uncles, John, Joseph, they served in the 11th East Lancashire Regiment, thinking that one great adventure. One pal will say, I'm going to enlist tomorrow. And somebody will say, right, I'll come with you. And then somebody else would go with them, and there'd be perhaps 4 or 5 all join up on the same day. As in the case of these 2 uncles of mine, they just went, volunteered, and that was it. Not thinking about the mother or anything like that. When my father went, he just went with the same thoughts of going, and with his friends were going, but in his case, he tried to get in the Navy. And he walked it from a village called Crosherbooth to Accrington, over the moors. No bus, over the moors. And when he got there, he was an inch too small, so he had to walk back. So the following day, he went to Rottenstall and volunteered for the Royal Army Medical Corps.
This film is of a battalion from the East Lancashire Regiment called the Terrors on its way to a Royal Review in 1909. 6 years later, the Powell's regiments left Blackburn from the same station for the Great War. Rex Law describes how it would have felt for men like his uncles and father who had just joined up.
When my uncles went and my father went, they would be doing exactly the same as these soldiers are doing now. They'd be embarking for probably going to Liverpool to get the troop ships to go straight through over to France. There's a padre. Can you see him with the white collar? He stood against the he's turned this way now. Can you see his white collar? The padre would go to give him some spiritual comfort, no doubt. A lot of these young men will never have been out of the valley, out of Rosendale or Blackburn or wherever they come from, and to go on a train. In fact, probably 50% would never have been on a train apart from going to Blackpool. But to go on a boat and go across water, well, I mean, it's another world, absolutely. As you can see now, they would have been waving like a holiday makers going on holiday, but it just simply wasn't holiday at the end of the day. They'd be thinking it was an adventure, just one big game. They would be like these. And got a smile on the face of each one of them. Even there's one drinking out of a bottle there. And then probably think, oh, we're back. Uniforms on, a few medals, and all the girls will be looking for us and what have you. They will be exactly the same, happy-go-lucky, glad to get away from the toil and turmoil of the mills and the whatever they were doing in the small villages. No future at all for them. They probably thought, well, we've got a future here. We're going in the army, and we're going and coming back as heroes, basically. Possibly little thinking that they wouldn't be coming home, as in the case of Joseph and John. One died of wounds in hospital, the other one was killed, and he was never seen again. His body was never recovered. And my father came back unscathed. But I think basically he was mentally wounded. When they volunteered, I don't think it was for king and country, quite honestly. I don't think so. Not from what I was told by my father. It was a case of a big adventure. Oh, you know, let's go, let's see what's outside these valleys. I think a lot of it was that. I don't think it was anything other than that. I'm positive it wasn't.
20,000 British soldiers died on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. Out of the 720 PALs from the small village of Accrington, 584 were killed, wounded, or missing in action. On the eve of the war, local films had gone out of fashion. Mitchell and Kenyon decided to part company. Kenyon retired to Southport and he died in 1925, aged 74. Mitchell convinced himself there was no future for him in the new film industry, and he went back to his original business. He became a successful photographer, taking portraits of local men who left for the war, as well as those who returned as heroes. Cinemas were being built all over the country, but many people thought it would be a passing phase, like the fashion for roller skating rinks that swept Britain at the same time. After the First World War, nearly every town in the country had a cinema. In all, there were over 3,500. Mitchell never went back to making his films, but luckily for us, he stored them away carefully. He died in 1952, aged 86. All of the people who have featured in Mitchell and Kenyon's films are long gone. These two Lancashire filmmakers could never have known that their films of local subjects would come to be so treasured and would tell us so much about their world. Mitchell and Kenyon's films remained in the basement of the shop for the rest of the 20th century. This incredible collection was almost lost, but instead is being preserved to reveal the world of our ancestors with more energy, humour and detail than ever before.
See the first of a landmark series tracing the roots of British jazz. Jazz Britannia is over on BBC 4 now. And on Sunday night here on BBC 2, teams from the Army and the RAF step into the sandal with Alexander the Great. Tank Commanders at 7:15.